So, hi everybody. This is Chapter 6, Section 3 in our books, and it's entitled Rate of Change. And so, we're going to bring back our buddies from before, the red-eyed tree frog and the smoky jungle frog, along with the strawberry dart poison frog, to help us talk about the rate of change. And of course, the topic is still evolution, which simply means that organisms change through time. We have a couple of goals for Chapter 6, Section 3. Make sure you get those in your journal, and your teacher will tell you on what page in your journal you should be writing this. But our first goal is to explain how a new species form, and secondly, to identify the two patterns that scientists have described to talk about the rate of evolution. And rate, of course, means how fast it occurs. So let's start off with our first goal, and we can see this has to do with our first goal because we have the number 1 here. It's a story of crickets and maggots and flies, oh my! So this story takes place in the state of Wyoming. This one takes place in the state of Hawaii, and in particularly the northernmost Hawaiian island, which is called Kauai. So this is a story of natural selection. It's the age-old story, the same story we've been telling every single day for 9 weeks. Species overproduce. Way too many babies are born than can survive. They're born with a lot of traits, and there's a lot of variation in those traits. Of course, some of those traits are better suited to the environment than others. So who gets to live? Well, those with the better traits have a better chance of survival. They grow up, they reproduce, and they pass on those better traits. You guys know the story. It's the same story. So this is a story of this very disgusting creature. It's a cricket or a grasshopper, if you prefer to call it that. And what the male cricket does is that it chirps. And the reason it chirps is because it wants to find a female mate. And so when the female hears it chirping, then the female goes and looks for the male. Well, that's fine and dandy, except that there is a parasitic fly in Kauai that has figured out that if it can listen to the chirping, it can find the grasshoppers, the male grasshoppers. So why is a parasitic fly interested in finding a male grasshopper? Well, because the female parasitic fly lays her eggs on the back of these crickets. And then when the eggs hatch, the larvae burrow into the body of these disgusting creatures and starts eating them alive, which of course then kills them. And of course, here's a picture of a parasitic fly burrowing into a cricket and thereby causing its justified demise. So, why do I tell you this story? What has this got to do with our topic of rate of evolution? Well, pretty soon, and I don't mean like overnight, but after generations of time, what happened was to these crickets in the island of Kauai is that their numbers went way down, as you can imagine, way down. And so in a 10-year period from 1999 until 2001, the cricket population went down because it was getting killed by these parasitic flies. But in less than 2 years later, in the year 2003, the numbers were up again. So what's the deal with that? So what happened is that a lot of these crickets were being born with the variety in the trait of chirping. Some of them were very loud chirpers, some of them couldn't chirp at all, and then we had everything in between. Well, the ones that were silent and couldn't chirp at all weren't being discovered by the parasitic flies. So those guys got to survive, reproduce, and pass on the you can't chirp gene to their offspring. And so by the year 2003, 2 short years later, the only thing we end up with on the island of Kauai is a bunch of male crickets that can't chirp. It's kind of like the rattlesnakes that can't rattle. And so it's the same story all over again. And through time, if this happens enough, you end up with a brand new species of, in this case, crickets. Crickets that can't chirp. So let's talk about the word speciation. And as you can see, inside of it is the word species. Speciation means we get a new species that's formed. So how can this happen? Well, they can form when a group of individuals remains isolated from the rest of its species long enough to evolve different traits that prevent reproduction. So if you need to pause the video to write this down, go ahead and do so. One way that this can be done is through geographic isolation. Geographic isolation is red. It's a vocab word. And here is the definition of geographic isolation. So, you get a group of individuals. They all belong to the same species. But somehow, some way, they get isolated from the rest of from each other. And so they kind of get split into 2 or 3 or 4. And they stay apart long enough so that through time, different traits evolve, and eventually they could end up being a brand new species. Now remember our definition of species. The species are organisms that can reproduce and have babies. But not only that, their babies can have babies. So don't forget that. So the idea is that this happens. How do they stay isolated? Well, there's something in the geography. Maybe there's a big mountain that forms over millions of years, and all those species, those members of the species who are on the north side, get isolated from the south side. And it just so happens that the habitats on the north side and the south side are very different. Or maybe it's a river that causes this. Or perhaps it's a big canyon that causes this. But it's something that causes something in the geography that makes them split, and they stay split. Here's an example. This is a squirrel. This is called Abert's squirrel. Here's another one. This one's called the Kaibab squirrel. And these guys are found on the north rim and the south rim of the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon has been formed, and is being formed by the Colorado River. And this has been happening for millions of years, and it continues to happen as the river cuts into this canyon. Well, these guys used to be, and as you can see, a lot of similarities, so it's not hard to believe that these guys are very recently related. Coloration is, of course, the biggest difference, and we could guess as to why that is. Remember, it's always the environment that's the culprit here. But one of these guys is found on the north rim, and the other one's on the south rim. Well, these are miles and miles and miles and miles apart. And so through time, these guys, for whatever reason, have stayed on the south side. The other ones have stayed on the north side. And the habitat is just different enough that the babies that are being born with the variation in the traits are being selected for. So for whatever reason, these guys are being selected for on their respective rim, and these guys are being selected for because the environments are just different enough. And it's the geographic, that splits them up. In this case, it's a canyon. So the principles of natural selection remain the same. Organisms produce more offspring than can survive. I'm not sure why that's in blue, but it is. There are differences that occur among the individuals of the species that are born. This is the variation in the traits we've been talking about. Some of these variations of traits get passed on to the offspring. And then some of these variations are helpful. Which ones? The ones that are best suited to the environment. Individuals with helpful variations survive, and they reproduce better than those without these variations. Over time, the offspring of these individuals with the helpful variations will make up more of the population. And if this just keeps on going and going and going, then eventually they may become different enough that they actually become a separate species. Over time, more and more individuals could be born with these new traits. And in hundreds, thousands, or even millions of generations, you could get a very new species that could evolve different enough so that they can't reproduce with one another anymore. Okay, so now we're heading to our second goal, and it's in red. It's called the 2 different kinds of rates of change. The first one is called gradualism, and in it we see the word gradual, which you know what that means. That means pretty slowly. These are very small changes that add up to major changes, and it takes a very long period of time. Let's quickly talk about the evolution of the horse. This is the Hyracotherium from 53 million years ago. This is just basically a midget horse is what he is. And then 35 million years ago, we got the Merychippus, which is a little bit bigger than this dwarf horse. And then, of course, this is today's horse. These are small changes, and I've only shown you two common ancestors to this one. There's a bunch in between here, obviously, and lots of little baby steps between here and here that took 53 minus 35 would be 18 million years. So lots of baby steps in between here. And then 35 million years go by to go from in between here to here. So lots of little baby steps, but it adds up to major changes. This guy is majorly different, even though there's still similarities from this guy. So it takes a long period of time. The other one is called punctuated equilibrium. These are short periods of rapid change, and then there isn't so much change after that anymore. Take a look at example of butterflies. Okay, this is the morphological changes, the structural changes in the butterfly. And this is the gradualism model, the very first one. We start off with this brownish, yellowish butterfly. And let's go up the right side. Remember, this represents from here to here time. And gradually it turns a little less brown, more red, less brown, more red, less brown, more red, until it's almost reddish, reddish, reddish. And so we get some huge changes. I mean, little baby changes along the way, but they add up to a major change here at the end. Same way as you go this way, we have this branching off in this cladogram here, and becomes a little more brown, less yellow, more white, more white. So from here to here, this major change, we get some major changes. We go from yellow to white, and lots of little baby steps along the way. In punctuated equilibrium, we get this rapid change. All of a sudden, it goes from brown to red in this short period of time. And then it doesn't change so much after that anymore. Some of them don't change at all. And some of them, another rapid change in a short period of time from here to here, instantly turns white. And then it doesn't change so much anymore. Take one more look. Birds. We have this orange blackbird. And through time, through a short period of time from here to here, it turns yellow. And then all of a sudden it stays yellow. Not much change anymore. And then we have orange, we go back to the orange bird again. Some of them stay orange. And then we get, in a short period of time, they turn red and stay red. Not much change anymore. That's punctuated equilibrium. Under gradualism, we get this gradual change, baby steps, a little more red, a lot more red, and so we get this major change from orange to red. And some of them are born with the yellowish gene, so it turns a little more orange, a little less orange, and then a whole lot less red, and then even more yellow. And so a lot of baby steps through the same period of time as we had over here, but we get this major change after these little baby steps. So that's Chapter 6, Section 3. Hope you enjoyed this unit, Chapter 6, as much as we did. See you later. Make sure you get all your notes, guys.